Over 800 million Chinese people have been lifted out of poverty in the past 4 decades, and the goal is to eradicate poverty within China by 2020. With 3 years to go, can China achieve that goal, and can China's experience work in other parts of the world? You're watching The Point. I'm Li Xin. After years of hard work, China is closing in on its goal of building what we call a moderately prosperous society in all aspects by 2020, with a baseline task of lifting all people out of poverty. As of the end of last year, there were still 43.4 million people, about 3% of the population, living below China's poverty line of 2,300 renminbi yuan, or roughly $340 per year. Now, with 3 years to go, will the goal be met? What has to be done? As China's achievements in poverty reduction are being recognized internationally, how can such experiences be helpful to other countries and regions in the world? Joining me for the discussion today in the studio are Mr. Mo Jihong, Deputy Secretary of the Municipal Committee of the Chinese Communist Party of Zhangye in northwest China's Gansu Province, Professor Xia Qingjie from the School of Economics at Peking University, and Michele Geraci, Head of the China Program at the Global Policy Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Mr. Mo, now Chinese President Xi Jinping bring out the idea of so-called targeted poverty reduction about exactly 3 years ago when he visited a village in central China's Hunan province. Now, 3 years on, do we have a clearer idea what exactly this strategy is in practice?
Yeah, I think because in the Xi Jinping's report to the 19th CPC National Congress, and the China entered into a new era. In this new era, and the social principle contradiction has been changed, and now we can find the social, the main contradiction just is described as the contradiction between unbalanced and inadequate development and the people's ever-growing needs for a better life. So how can we protect the people can get the better life? So we can find since the 1978, and China began to take the open and the reform policy, and our Chinese government did more in developing the rural area. And we try to reduce poverty in the rural area, especially maybe in the urban area. Also, we have similar problem. So I think how can we just put all the people together, and we can get the better life. So this is a common issue. So we have to resolve the poverty problem in the rural area. So that's the reason why we want to implement the target and poverty elevation policy.
Yeah, Professor Xia, what are we targeting?
We're targeting by the income poverty or by the consumption poverty, and those people who lived under the poverty line. And I think China has made tremendous progress on this line, because at the very beginning of the economic reform, 76% of rural people, 55% of urban people live under the poverty line. But right now, perhaps less than 4% of people, rural people, live under the poverty line. So I have been always asking myself why China has made such a tremendous progress. I think finally I find out that it was because China has a very successful industrialization. Without industrialization, anything wouldn't be talked about.
But at this particular stage, when we talk about targeted poverty relief, what are we talking about? What is being targeted?
They generally say there's 6 targeting exactly who live under the poverty line, and targeting the leaders who are going to solve this problem, targeting the method to solve this problem, and targeting the places suffered its problem.
So basically, it's precision-guided poverty reduction approach. Michele, why do you think we have to adopt this approach now in China?
Because the last mile is always the most difficult goal to obtain. It was, first of all, China's achievement has been remarkable in the history of mankind, and all the Western world is in awe to look at what China has done. However, we also should say that it was relatively easy at the beginning when we had 75% in the rural area poor and half of the people in the urban area poor, with an income per capita of 300 renminbi in the urban area and 130 renminbi in the rural area per year. It was easy to do anything, and it's like who was making money in the 80s in China? Anyone who would export anything. And so there was no need for targeting. Now, when we have a population which is still below poverty line of, some people say 5%, some people say 10%, depending on if we use the $1 per day, which is the official Chinese government of $340 per year, or the World Bank $1.9 per day, which would bring maybe to 80 million roughly. But that doesn't really matter. The point is that now we need to target it, because like you just said, we cannot just do an umbrella approach. We need to know who these 43 million people are, where do they live, who runs the business, the family, and what are the places, because China geography is also in a way that most of these people live in regions that are not easily reachable.
Sure. Now, Zhangye is in northwest China's Gansu province. Northwest China, or Western China in general, lags behind the development of the coastal regions. You have been the Deputy Secretary of the Zhangye Municipal Party Committee. What has been the experience in that city in terms of poverty alleviation?
Yeah, and because I'm a Deputy Secretary General, so also I have some deep impression on the...
How poor is that area, is that city?
Yeah, I know your meaning is that poor, and the poverty is very difficult to define because now at the different level we have different standard. Just like the Gansu province last year, and we take the income just below 3,500 yuan. That is this family, just the income below the 3,500 yuan. But this year we're changing the standard. We just improve the standard to the 3,700 yuan. So it's very difficult to define what's the meaning of the poverty.
But what's the rough percentage of the local population that are living under the line you were mentioning?
Yeah, but I'm not quite sure what's the exact statistics about the Gansu province, but I can understand the Zhangye situation. And at the beginning of this year, and the Zhangye government declared, and all the county, we have the 6 counties, and we just all the county get out of poverty, but we still have the
by the end of this year.
No, at the beginning of this year.
At the beginning of this year.
But we still have the poverty household, and just below the 3% of the population.
Just under 3%.
Yeah, so now and we take the special measure to help such the people just below the 3% of the population. So now, and we personally, I think we have 3 kinds of experience. Firstly, because every day we say the Chinese characteristic. What's the meaning Chinese characteristic? Because now in China, the Communist Party and the Communist Party that leads all the work.
Yes.
In the country, so first
before you move on to your second point, I want to really ask the two of you, how important is the ability or the depth and the reach of the Chinese party organization on the grassroots level important in China's poverty alleviation work? Professor Xia.
I think Chinese Communist Party is completely different from the Western parliamentary party. They are fighting for the general election to get the power. But in China, the parties have a much stronger position, have all means in China to get rid of the poverty, any kind of things. And also, I think China is different from other developing countries. China has a long history. in my view, that the Chinese basic political structures, basic governance structures has never changed since the Qin dynasty, since Qin Shi Huang.
Which means a very strong central government?
Yes, has always been like that. Yes, and that kind of trend has been strengthening.
Has been strengthening.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also maybe very contradicting with what Western people has argued, that this kind of government is exclusive. But in terms of China, very inclusive. Because in every dynasty, all the elite was recruited to the central government by the clergy, the national exam system for the government officials. So it becomes very efficient in the governing structure.
I see your point. Michele, is that what we're talking about, the importance of the ability to implement the central policies at the grassroots level?
There is an element of truth, because in emerging markets, when you don't have time to debate too much, a strong government, whether it's central local government, that implements what they say is key. And it is correct that if we start debating too much on who should do it, then things don't get done. So one of the key successes of China has been the control and the cascading down of the policy from central government to provincial, prefecture and city level, and then village, town and so on. That has actually made the things, because we know the system in China is very nicely arranged. So the directive comes from above, and then people, it's like a cascading up and down. The directive goes from top to down, and promotion goes from bottom up if the deadline and the objectives are met. And so there is a total alignment of interest. And so now there's 43 million people working under not just Shanghai and other places. Every village chief, every county official knows that his promotion and his advancement will depend not just on GDP growth, not just on the environment, but the pie of the promotion will be bigger in the poverty reduction or elimination for that 3% of his own county, and that works very well.
And also which means to incentivize governments at all levels to put their resources into this practice. You have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We have been talking about China's targeted poverty reduction policy, and we'll be back right after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, and we continue our discussion on the targeted poverty reduction strategy in China. Mr. Moore, I interrupted you. What is the second point now here?
Yeah, just now I said in China, the Chinese Communist Party play a very important role in the field of just a target poverty elevation. So here, just now you ask me what's the meaning of the target. So it's very complicated to define, because there are two ways. First of all, and maybe you ask me what's the meaning of the target poverty family, or what's the meaning of target poverty household. Yeah, it's a very special group of the people. And secondly, what's the meaning of the target poverty elevation policy? Yeah, it's different. Just the later the target poverty elevation, that's the meaning, and how many measures can be taken by the government. And maybe first of all, make the target policy, and then just taken the target the measure. So I can explain in the Changye how can we do.
Yes.
So Chinese Communist Party, first of all, make a very comprehensive policy. We just take the poverty relief elevation as a social engineering. So first of all, we ask all the leader at different level, and we should contact with some special family, even for me. I have two villagers. I should every month I should visit them and just ask them their problem and find the new situation. This is the first point. I think is very successful.
Is it just the party or government officials that are signing?
Just
not the ordinary citizens.
Not ordinary citizens, just the
so you'll be held
servicemen.
Personally responsible if they're not lifted out of poverty.
I should every month I should visit them to find some situation. What has happened? What can I help them? So this is the first experience. Secondly, how can we find the target poverty family household? So in Changye, our government take a very special policy, and we just dispatch the young cat And many young people they live in the villager. So they work with the villager, and every day, and they discuss, and they live together, and they can find which family is the poorest, really poorest. And then we can get the exact statistics about the target poverty family. So here is the second way. Thirdly, and we try to find a special program to help the target poverty family. Maybe we just establish the rural cooperative, you know, maybe the several family, and they just put their land together. Maybe they use the land and just plant the vegetable and they sell, so they get the money, they can have some mutual help. So it's a very good experience for us.
And does it work?
It works very well.
Work very well.
Work very well. Yeah.
Professor Xia, it's really quite interesting, right? The way to survey the people, to find out the people, and then the way to link government officials or party officials with impoverished family. Is that specifically a Chinese thing, or have you seen this kind of thing when you were studying abroad?
I think I don't. This kind of exactly targeting, I think, is only be implemented by Chinese governments, because when the central government said, the local governments and the local, even the village leaders must implement it, carried out these measures. But in terms of United States or other European countries, the central government cannot control the local governments, because local governments are also elected. They are just work in their own ways. Might not listen to the central governments. So what could be some of the potential risks of having this, cascade one direction? It's an order, you have to do it. Is there any risk in there? I mean, if you make a mistake in the policy, maybe, you can't correct it very easily.
Yeah, and sometimes I can find some problem because...
For instance?
For instance, some the rural resident, they just like the government just offer many things to them. So they like to become a poverty family, because if they are
categorized
family,
as
they can get much support from the government.
I see.
So it's a big problem.
Yeah. So what are some of the mechanisms or policies to solve these problems?
Yeah, and now just at the very beginning of taking the policy of the target poverty elevation, maybe the government also at the high level just give the money, just without any activity, just give you the money. And finally we find such the policy maybe just waste much more the public resource. So now we just changing the financial policy, and we can give their microfinance, just finance, and just help them. Maybe they can establish some the plants, some of the farmer, and if they need money, we give them money, but they should returning. So this is the way can control. And the people, they just ask the money from the government.
So they're encouraged to work.
Encourage the poor family to work very hard, and then they can get out of the poverty really.
Michele, what is your thoughts on
but I agree. I actually worked on the microcredit programs in Sichuan, near in the north of Chengdu, many years ago, and there was a famous rule number 23 of the government that basically set up this microcredit institution a little bit, in 2008, so 10 years ago, to actually even then target, just to avoid these unbalanced development that anyone could claim to be poor. With microcredit, there was a little bit of analysis of who were the really recipients of these funds. It was not aid, it was a loan, and so it was almost like an investment that each of these village banks and microcredit institution was granting. After analyzing, and actually we did go around to analyze the potential of the farmers, that if they, for example, were changing the crops that they were growing from rice to flowers. We know that the income goes up by 5 times, or peppers, 2 renminbi versus 10 renminbi per pound. And so that was a little bit of a business plan. And so there was also an incentive on behalf of these farmers not to just passively get the money, but to a little bit to work to earn it. And that did help a little bit. And indeed it has helped in India and Bangladesh, because we have the examples of Grameen banks as a tools, and in Latin America. And so China has implemented this, and I think this is a very good way to solve the agency problem.
What about the issue of sustainability in poverty reduction? I also mean maybe some people are helped out of poverty, but what is the possibility that they slip back into poverty? What measures does the Chinese policy have to prevent that from happening? Because President Xi Jinping also talked about 真脱贫, right? That means you're not just on paper or in numbers being out of poverty, but for real you're out of poverty and once for all. Professor Xia.
For those very vulnerable people and just live around the poverty line, and they're very likely to fall in the poverty trap again. So in the future, I think China will carry out some very different policy after the 2020. One policy is, for example, the agriculture insurance. If because the agricultural activity and animal husbandry, they are very uncertain and affected by the weather, by the disease. So if the government can give the rural people who engage in this agriculture or the animal production activities, give them official subsidies to the insurance company. If their business fail, the insurance will recover their money. I think in that way they become sustainable. And there's other ways. For example, in China, has always been that basic education and also the medical care support. And that's going to make sure that if people get ill, they will not fall into poverty. If they go to the, for example, go to the schools, they will get subsidies. So through the social support and the economic measures, I think in the future the poverty reduction level can be retained or sustained.
Well, one question everybody tend to ask is, can China's experience be copied or be of help to other regions that are also plagued by poverty? For instance, Africa, for instance, South Asia, for instance, some parts in Europe where you still have poverty. Michele, your answer?
In Europe, in fact, the poverty rate is going up, because the economy is in danger. And so actually we have a situation where even in developed countries, the number of poor people is going up. So it's completely unusual. The experience of China copied into or used into other countries is more difficult for the reason we said before, because China can manage centrally. In the West, we have another tendency. Instead of letting the government do this, we have a non-government organization, NGOs, take care of this part of the population. The problem is that NGOs are relatively small organizations in general. I mean, they're the big ones, and so they choose who and when they target. And that may create imbalances, because, for example, you may have an NGO targeting a certain area and not the area nearby. And so you create a situation where the people living in the lucky place, they get the help from the NGO and not in the other one. We have seen, for example, in Africa, we have seen poverty rates being almost flat at 50% for the last 30, 40 years. Only recently have gone down from 50 to 40% for the whole of Africa. And I think this has been due to China investing in Africa. This is part of the question that we are asking. And the model that China can actually do an export is the infrastructure development, urbanization-based development. So not just making poor people richer, but also getting some of the people from the rural areas to the urban areas and upgrade the income to 3 times like it's in China. And so that's an easy way. You take them out, you do a geographical migration, and that helps. But infrastructure and urbanization must come first.
Professor Xia, your take on the question?
I think China's success in the poverty reduction, or in general, in the industrialization, has a great implication to those developing countries. Nobel Prize winner Professor Amartya Sen used to say in Peking University, I think 2 years ago, that if without China's success, India wouldn't reform. So China's success basically is industrialization. It's a successful industrialization in the past 40 years. And this experience would greatly encourage countries like India, like African countries, Latin American countries. They can, those less developed countries can still make some success in economic growth, in industrialization, in the poverty alleviation. I think we should, and people in China and other countries should study the experience and examine and disseminate it to the other countries, and would bring the poverty level down in the other countries.
Mr. Moore, just now Michele brought up the concept of NGOs. On the city level in Zhangye, how is the government coordinating the role between government agencies and social entities such as NGOs? Can NGOs in China play the role that Michele talked about in Europe?
Yeah, it's a good question. Just you see the NGO, I think is a typical Western world. In our country, the NGO is very difficult to define which organization is NGO. We just said maybe social organization. Some social organizations just are supported by the government. And some social organizations maybe they can do their work independently. But in the field of target poverty alleviation, I think we have some NGO, maybe in some degree, just like some enterprise, or some rural cooperative, or some maybe the social charitable organization. Yeah, and we just ask some enterprise to recruit some people in the poor family, and so they can get the job, so they can afford their family. So this is one way. Another way, maybe there are many public charitable organizations, and also they can establish some mutual assisting system in the rural area, and so they can send many the useful material to the poor family.
But the primary responsibility and the primary job is on the government to do that.
Yeah, I think in China, the primary work should be done by the government. Yeah, this is our characteristic. Yeah. Okay. So also I can give you some example.
We don't have the time for that today. Thank you very much to my three guests, Mr. Mo Jihong, Deputy Secretary of Zhangye Municipal Party Committee, Gansu Province, Professor Caixin Jie from the School of Economics at Peking University, and Michele Geraci, Head of China Program at the Global Policy Institute. Thank you very much for joining us today. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Thank you for watching. I hope you've got the point.